Mike, I was talking to some attorneys who do a lot of car wreck cases, and something was mentioned about trying to work on truck wreck cases and that they had taken on a truck wreck case. And one of the attorneys said something that really stuck with me. He said, "Well, a truck wreck case is just a big
Big
car
car
wreck."
wreck, right? I've seen that and I've heard that. That's why I was able to finish that sentence. That's hilarious. It's really not, though. And you and I know that. There are so many differences between a truck wreck and a car wreck. It's not a big car wreck case. There are specific laws and regulations and safety rules that apply to truck wrecks, that apply to trucking companies, that apply to truck drivers, and there's information that is readily available there. If you get to the scene, if you have a lawyer that knows what to look for, there is so much evidence to prove your case, to prove what happened. Um, there are electronic downloads from the truck's computer. There are written logs that are now actually kept electronically. For years, as you know, the driver could just write down
Right.
whatever he said he was doing for the last 7 days. Well, now there's electronic logs that tell you where he was or she was, how fast they were going, how long they've been on the road, all kinds of evidence that is available if you know what to ask for and if you know how to get it and how to get it fast. If you don't, the trucking company's not going to volunteer it, and the trucking company's lawyer is certainly not going to volunteer that information. And so it's just a lot different than a regular car wreck. Um,
It's amazing because in a car wreck case, so often the person who's injured will go hire an attorney, but there's really no attorney hired on the other side, the person who was at fault. They have an insurance adjuster who's looking at things. And it's not until all the settlement negotiations between us and the insurance adjuster fail and we file suit that even an attorney shows up for the at-fault person, the defendant in the case. But boy, that's not the way a truck wreck works, is
I was hoping you were going to let me say
it?
that. That is not the way it happens in a truck wreck case. If you're injured in a serious truck wreck case, I can assure you there's a lawyer involved for the trucking company and for the trucking company's insurance company probably before you make it out of the emergency room.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the majority of the cases that we have, the trucking cases that we have, when we send a letter to the insurance company, what is it? Usually within an hour, a lawyer calls us.
Oh, yeah.
It is something that they really circle the wagons very fast. And if you don't have a lawyer on your side, uh, that can work to your disadvantage because the other team is in full battle mode. And and lots of times they're out there on the street taking pictures, removing evidence from the scene. We've seen that how many times?
Yep.
And even talking to the police officer. I remember one case you had. Can we talk about that?
Sure, yeah. I knew what you were going to bring up.
There's a case that Sam had where we won't use the name, but our client was making a turn, a right-hand turn, and the truck came around him and cut him off and ran up underneath the truck, and he got a head injury that knocked him out at the scene. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And the trucking company's lawyer talked to the investigating police officer on the scene and convinced the DPS officer that our client must have passed out from an epileptic fit and caused the wreck. He didn't get knocked out from the impact in the wreck. Supposedly, this theory he had an epileptic fit. He had never had. Tell the rest of that story.
Well, that's what was so crazy because in that case, there was actually an insurance adjuster for the trucking company and a defense attorney for the trucking company made it to the scene of the accident before the DPS officer finished his investigation and were able to talk to him and convince him that it couldn't have been this impact that knocked my client unconscious. It had to have been that he's an older man and he must have had some type of seizure or stroke and just passed out. So the DPS officer, because he's now been convinced, wrote his police report up that way and even filed it with DPS to remove the man's driver's license, to say that he was physically unfit to drive because he had lost consciousness unexpectedly driving down the road. irregardless of the fact when he got to the emergency room and they did a CAT scan, he had a concussion. He had hit his head in the car wreck so hard that it had knocked him out. And that was the reason that he had passed out. He had not suffered a stroke. He had no history of epilepsy. He literally first called me right after he got out of the hospital because he was so worried about his driver's license. That was his first concern. Even though the man was still hurt and was still going to the doctor, he was having trouble getting to the doctor because he no longer had a driver's license.
Absolutely. And in that case, the adjuster and the defense lawyer were on scene talking to the investigating police officer before the trucks were towed away. Yeah. And the gentleman we're talking about actually temporarily, until Sam got involved, lost his driver's license. Yeah. They took his driver's license away from him because the adjuster for the insurance company had convinced the investigating police officer that he must have had an epileptic seizure. Yeah. And so I actually watched that case with at the JP level, and Sam went and convinced the police officer right there in court about the mistake that he had made, and he actually apologized and changed his opinion right there in Justice of the Peace Court. And so that was step one, is getting our client his driver's license back, and then step two was going after the insurance company, and you did a really good job of that as well.
Well,
so
it definitely made it a harder fight because of that head start that the people had, because my client was in the hospital for almost a month, I believe, and that entire time the insurance company for the trucking company had been circling their wagons, getting their defenses ready, and it made it a very uphill battle, but we were able to get there.
Absolutely, and we got a good result for our client. Those are the kinds of stories that really make me feel good about what we do.
Absolutely.